All right, so my name is Ronald Francis, and as it says on this slide, I am a PhD candidate in linguistics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And coming off of what Dr. Ferrero was just speaking about in terms of understanding learners on a transformative approach, I want to talk a little bit about testing language competence before teaching or before moving into curricula and various pedagogical strategies. I think it's been well documented in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world as well that when you have one official language in multilingual space or in a multilingual country or territory, that it poses various challenges. And those challenges include speakers who do not speak the official language or speak dialects or Creole languages or a variety of the official language that is not standard and not recognized by that country or space. They have difficulty navigating the health system, the legal system, and definitely the education sphere as well. And my research is zooming in specifically on education. The problem is that a system in which there is one official language and in a multilingual space is that people are automatically excluded. So they need help navigating those systems, and they need help understanding, or they need interpretation. A lot of that has been covered today already. And this problem has been studied by linguists in the Caribbean and education practitioners. And just as proof of that, I have a document from 1993, The Future of Education in the Caribbean, where linguists and educationalists came together and they spoke about certain policy goals, one of them being to recognize all the languages in use in the society as equally valid and to see multilingualism and multidialectism as positive attributes. They also noted that the learning of English poses special difficulties because West Indian learners of English, for example, who have Creole backgrounds or Creole-related backgrounds, and not native speakers of English. And so the teacher of English has to be able to assist these students to acquire additional competence, which non-native speakers cannot be expected to acquire without special attention. So that means quite simply that for a lot of students, English is a second language learning experience in the Caribbean. And again, this has been well established in today's presentations. They mentioned, even though I don't have it on the slide here, the need for diagnosis, for understanding competence before we move into the classroom. And certain projects have been undertaken in the Caribbean to help with that, to make sure that all languages are equally represented and that students are taught in a language they understand. The two most notable of those are the MIT Haiti Initiative and the Bilingual Education Project from the Jamaica Language Unit in Mona, in Jamaica. Now, MIT has had, the Haiti Initiative has had tremendous success. And I posit that that success is due to the fact that most, if not all of the students speak Creole. They speak French Creole. So the mother tongue is very clear, or the L1 that they're using is very clear. That is also aided by the fact that Creole is official in Haiti. So attitudes towards Creole, even though there are still issues of attitudes towards Creole, among the speakers themselves, attitudes have improved. There were challenges that those who pursued the bilingual education project in Jamaica identified. Among those were different attitudes towards a language in use, using Jamaican in the classroom, Jamaican Creole in the classroom, as well as different levels of awareness of Jamaican. So they discovered that students are multilingual and that students cannot be treated as a homogeneous body in the classroom. And they concluded that the approach in the bilingual education project, as they refined it, cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, as I have here from Devonish and Carpenter. So coming off of that, it means that there is a need, as has been established, to understand mother tongue and to understand L1, to understand prior competence or knowledge, what students come into the classroom with, and to study transfer, how mother tongue knowledge or that prior knowledge influences the speaking and the writing of students in English. But there is also a need not to treat the classroom as a homogeneous body. It means that we cannot assume that every student has the same competence, and we have to focus specifically on understanding the competence of every student in the classroom prior to pedagogical strategies being developed or developing appropriate curricula. And in St. Lucia, where my work is being done, I am St. Lucian. We have a multilingual and a multidialectal situation. So for example, we have Creole, which is a French lexicon Creole that is spoken by a lot of St. Lucians to various degrees, of course. And then we have English, which is the one official language. And then there is a new emergent variety that scholars have identified called vernacular English of St. Lucia. It has various names, but it's referred to as vernacular English of St. Lucia. And we do not know which of these or how much competence students have in each of these varieties or each of these languages in question. So my study specifically looks at the writing of students. That is my PhD study, among other things. It looks at the writing of students, and I focus specifically on errors, even though that is not the study is not delimited by that. But I want to understand how much of the forms that I'm seeing in the writing are Creole influenced forms or forms that bear semblance to Creole, the French lexicon Creole. It's also important to understand the forms that are non-Creole influenced or things that are due to the innate complexity of English. I will show an example of that shortly. And then, of course, unattributed forms or shared forms, which form a minority of the things that I see, because vessel, as far as has been discussed in the literature, borrows from Creole and from English. You know, it's a contact variety or contact language or contact dialect, however you'd like to refer to it, because that is not clear in the literature as yet. But there are some forms that are shared by both systems, the two major systems at play. And so I want to understand these forms and understand the relationship between these forms and how students perform academically. And just to be clear about what I mean by Creole influence or non-Creole influence, here are two examples. So here is something that I might call a Creole influenced verb form in the writing. A student might say something like, the boy swing the bat. And it has been established that unmarked non-stative verbs mark past tense in Creole languages, particularly Atlantic Creoles. And something that might be considered non-Creole influenced would be something like the boy swinged the bat, for example. And that is due to the fact that that verb is irregular in English. It has an irregular past tense. So what does all this mean? What does the data say? Well, let's consider two students from the same school. In fact, two students from the very same classroom. The first student I found, after analyzing the writing of that student, 48% of the forms, the grammatical forms, the structural forms found in the writing bore greater semblance to Creole or were what I would call Creole influenced forms. And that student got about 18 out of 30 in the essay. So we have to ask ourselves, well, is this student Creole dominant or Creole dominant? Within that very same classroom, there's another student in which only 0.05%, right? We're talking about really just a small percentage of the errors found in the essay were Creole influenced forms. And that student got 18.5 out of 30, so about the same grade. So we have to ask ourselves as well, is that student English dominant as opposed to Creole dominant? How much competence does that student have in English? Just to mention the second student here, most of the errors that I found or the non-standard forms that I found in the writing were due to the innate complexity of English or things like the second example that I showed in the previous slide. So what does all of this mean? It means exactly what Devonish and Carpenter found in the bilingual education project, which is that one size does not fit all in teaching. And that diagnosis, as was mentioned in the 1993 paper from CARICOM, is important. Students need to be tested before teaching so that we understand exactly what competence they come into the classroom with. From a pedagogical perspective, we know that the variability that has been identified is too high to ignore, because if we treat the classroom as homogeneous, inadvertently or advertently, some students will be left out. And we also know that learner corpora, or doing work like the work I'm doing right now, can be a very useful tool in analyzing the problem areas and developing appropriate curricula for the Caribbean, for St. Lucia specifically that I'm studying. So I suggest a simple formula. Start with learner corpora, pick up copies of students' writing, analyze the writing of students, record students and analyze their speech, test competence so that we have an understanding of a student's knowledge prior to entering the classroom or while they are developing in the education system, and then developing pedagogy or curricula that are better suited for multilingual situations. Thank you. I believe I was right on time there, 10 minutes.